And to start the recording here. Just 1 second.
Yep.
Welcome to Bon Jovi Discussions. Today I have my buddy Michael from New York. How you doing, buddy?
What's going on, people? Doing good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on tonight and doing this chat with me.
Of course. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. So before we get into the chat, though, I have to ask you, how did you become a Bon Jovi fan?
Mom and dad.
Okay.
When I was...
Who was the actual fan, though, between mom and dad? The mom?
No, more dad. Mom was more soft rock, Foreigner, Journey, and dad was Bon Jovi, Leopard, and so on.
Nice. Okay.
And that was about when I was little. When I was 6, 7 years old. When I used to go to work with my dad, he would play the Crossroads CD endlessly.
Okay.
And that's how it all started.
Oh man, so how old were you?
Oh, it was 2003, 2004. I was 7.
So then you started to dig deeper into their catalog and stuff?
Yeah, actually that Christmas, and it's actually kind of funny, in 2004, I got my first CD, and it was the This Left Feels Right CD. And I put it in the car. I was so let down because it was all acoustic, and
oh man,
you wanted the whole, when you're that young, you wanted just, what you heard on the radio.
Yeah.
And as time moved on, and you got introduced to technology, like when you get your own phone, your own computer, and you start doing your own Googling and this and that, and that's when you undiscover a lot of stuff.
Now, I always tell other people, This Life Feels Right is an incredible album. I absolutely love the album, but it's definitely not the first album I'd give to someone who's never really listened to them before.
Exactly.
That's like an album that you give later down the road. You know what I'm saying? That's funny. What's your favorite song?
Living in Sin.
Nice. I love that one. I loved it when they would do Chapel of Love at the end of it live. But
yeah.
Yeah, but Living in Sin, that's great. What's your favorite album?
Probably Lost Highway.
Dude, that's my favorite.
Yeah, dude, I'm all about the writing more than, obviously I love all Prayer, Band Name, all the anthems, but it's the writing that does it for me. Yeah. That makes me, that's why I like Living in Sin. My long story short, my parents were divorced, and reading the lyrics of that song just made me understand things in a different way, a different light of stuff, where you could view it. I know how John viewed it with Dorothea and, his private life at that moment, but it has more than one meaning, which is what makes a great song.
Yeah, and that's what's beautiful about music is, John says it all the time. What he writes down to write a song about and then puts it out there, it becomes your song, and you can interpret it in different ways. That's the great thing about music, I guess, right?
That's what's great about Lost Highways, because I see, obviously the country influences and the country writing behind it, but each song has a different definition and different moment that can kind of grab you, as We Got It Going On, which is more like the party kind of song. Yep. And then a song like The Last Night, where it's still upbeat, but God, are those lyrics powerful.
Oh, I know. That's what Lost Highway is, such a good album, where you need something that pumps you up and makes you feel good, like Lost Highway, Summertime, We Got It Going On. Then there's those romantic songs or nostalgia, you want to make a memory, and then there's also songs that are about loss and feeling alone, feeling isolated, and just needing somebody to be there. It's just a fantastic album.
Memory grew on me. I didn't love that at first. It grew on me.
That is my absolute favorite song.
I know Desmond Child takes so offense that it didn't get the commercial success it could have.
Yeah.
It is lyrically beautiful, but now I think just being my late 20s and understanding the meaning of it, if it comes to relationships with girls, it could definitely grab somebody's attention.
Yeah, I thought it wasn't heavily popular, but it was, I heard it on the radio a lot back in 2007 and stuff. And, it was everywhere on TV. But yeah, maybe it probably wasn't as heavily as successful as other singles and stuff. But anyway, let's get into our topic because this is gonna be a really fun one. We are going to talk about the evolution of the band. So we are going to go from the early 80s all the way up till now. We're just kind of give a little overview of each kind of era of the band, albums and stuff, and just kind of talk about how they've evolutionized over the years. So let's start back from even before there was Bon Jovi, right? So let's start with John Bon Jovi, who knew he wanted to be a rock star and, really didn't care about school and, played nightclubs and then would go to school the next day and then play nightclubs again that night. And he just had that hunger of success. You've heard the Power Station sessions.
Yep.
So a lot of those songs were recorded from 1980 to 83 when John worked. I know you know this already, but just in case anybody that's listening doesn't, John worked at his cousin's recording studio in New York, the Power Station, I think it was called. Yep. And at night, John would be able to record on his own for a little bit. And so he had all these songs of demos. Obviously, they didn't go anywhere. And it unofficially got released to us like in the late 90s. And but a lot of those songs on that album are gems.
They are gems, especially the first record that they put out. Because obviously everybody jumps to Runaway, and that's the main focus of it. They have like songs like Get Ready, Shot Through the Heart, which is
let's stay pre-debut first though.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, I didn't mean to rudely interrupt you. I just wanted to kind of go back to the Power Station real quick. Before there was even a Runaway, these songs that were recorded in 80, 81, 82. Runaway kind of came in 82, 83, before the band even came in. But those songs that were recorded from 80 to 82, man, those are phenomenal. And how those didn't really get much. I know John probably didn't really promote it or try to sell it to a radio station, but man, I think a lot of the songs in there could have really been successful.
Yeah, 100%. It could have, it was also him taking matters into his own hands too, just to get the attention he eventually needed. But his write-in solo or when he would collaborate was second to none from the beginning. He always knew how to tell a story through a song, which is extremely important because that's how you grow and network your audience in that way.
It's a connection. Yeah,
you could take them, if you're going left, right, you could take them and you can make those songs impact people, but not the way that he probably wrote it for himself, where he was feeling this way about whatever the topic he was thinking of, but somebody else views it and be like, yeah, no, this relates to me, but not from the prospect, the way that you wrote it. That's why he's such a great songwriter.
Yeah, exactly. And then eventually Runaway got written and recorded and stuff. And it's actually, a lot of people think it's the actual band Bon Jovi that recorded it. It's not. It's different hired musicians. Yeah. And so in 83, John was just going from radio station to radio station or record company to record company saying, hey, you got to listen to this Runaway. I think it's good. And nobody would take it. And as you already know, he found a lonely DJ in New York City. I'm drawing a blank on the name. It'll come to me at the end of this.
Chip Hobart was his name. The DJ's name, I believe, was Chip Hobart.
Chip. And thankfully there was no secretary, so John was able to give it to him, and the DJ thankfully played it. I mean, it just became a request, and it was a hit. And John didn't even have a record deal yet. He didn't have a band. He just on his own with hired musicians. And then obviously, we know the story, Alec kind of introduced everybody to John, and that's how, Alec, Tico, David, and Richie, and then John got the record deal with Mercury, but the band didn't. So I think John was signed before the band was even formed.
Yeah, he essentially had a hit record without a band. He had the Runaway. He had Runaway on the radio everywhere, but he had studio musicians playing the actual instruments on it. But there wasn't the the Bon Jovi, the band that everybody knows, that wasn't formed yet, really.
Exactly, and so when he did get signed, he eventually formed, the band as we know it, and they were signed under him, and then they went in to record the debut album. And what I love, and we'll get into 7800 here in a moment, but what I really loved about debut and 7800 is that it's a shame how underrated they are, but I think it makes us value those albums more, because in a way, those albums were, as John calls it, his baby albums, and he's like embarrassed by them. But I think they're two gems, because those two albums really show the hunger that they had for success and to make it. And there was a lot of collaborative effort. David also wrote some songs. Richie was essential on guitar. He was just a phenomenal. John's vocals. I mean, the band was just on point. And there's a lot of gems, like Shot Through the Heart, Get Ready, Come Back, and Roulette, something like that. They're like, wow.
That's another beautiful one.
Which one?
Love Lies. I love the song.
Love Lies, yeah. That's the one with the piano intro, right?
Yeah, no intro, and
yeah,
that's where you hear his voice really expand, go to high, like how he when he was younger, he could, without the big chorus, just him on his own could do that.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I wanted to mention too, I mentioned about the piano. A lot of rock bands back in the 80s were not doing keyboard players. A lot of keyboard players were playing in pop bands and stuff like that. But rock bands, like hair bands, they weren't doing keyboard players. You usually just had two guitar players, a bass player, and a drummer. And I think what made Bon Jovi really stand out, along with many other things, was that there was a keyboard player, and it added a different kind of sound that you didn't get with all the other hair bands. As much as I love those other hair bands, they all kind of coincided with each other, But Bon Jovi had that distinct sound,
That's where I think John always, wanted to more stay true to himself, where, it could be as simple as, the most, common musical instruments, or piano, guitar, drums, where he, it's like, of course we're gonna have one. He's never trying to copy anybody and be like, we're gonna be Journey Part 2. That's what we're gonna do. He never did that. He kind of did his own thing, and obviously it's worked.
Exactly. And then for the debut album, they opened up for ZZ Top and Kiss and Scorpions and stuff, and you're just trying to get their name out there, basically. And they were booed so many times at different shows and stuff. And debut sold quite a few copies, but it also tanked.
Yeah,
as many first albums do, especially back then for bands. But then we get into 7800, and you had a different avenue. I think Richie was heavier on this album, which I think is great.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the lyrics were also getting more. Debut was just seeing what the band could produce. I think 7800 was trying to figure, okay, how do we collaborate as a band? How do we, where are we trying to find our sound? Where are we trying to write about? Stuff like, they were trying to find their path. And I think 7800 really demonstrates that.
Yeah, it definitely, it gets, kicked around a lot as it's, this poor album and so on and so forth, but it's truly not. I mean, you read half of the lyrics to the songs on 7800, whether it's Only Lonely or Silent Night or The Price of Love, Hardest Part is the Night. It's like reading a soap opera, because it's pure poetry, and the songs, maybe they didn't stick commercially, but don't tell me it might have been whatever that the movement was at the moment, but don't tell me it was because the songs were bad, because they weren't at all.
Exactly. And I think I love both debut and 7800, but if I had to pick which album was better, 7800 hands down. And we also get introduced to a little more ballad like Bon Jovi, because in the debut you get a little bit of that, but you don't get a lot of it.
You got a taste of that. And 7800 really, they overall heartbroken. It sounded like they all took their emotions and put them out there, and that was almost like a hint for more what's to come.
Yeah, and they were all going through breakups, and I think one of them was going through a divorce, and but you get songs like "Price of Love," "Only Lonely," "Silent Night," songs like that where they're pouring their hearts out. But then you also get fun songs like "In and Out Love," which is just a fucking incredible intro to the album, and Richie's just slays on guitar. Um, Another thing I want to bring up too before we move ahead, the music videos from the first two albums. If you want to watch anything that's cringy and cheesy, So You Don't Know Me, especially that beach scene, and Only Lonely, which Only Lonely video makes no sense whatsoever. Even though it's such a great song,
It's a
the
great
video
song.
is like, what?
It's like a combination of being on the boardwalk in Seaside Heights, New Jersey, and like a wannabe mob movie with the guy, not the guy in the beginning. And it was like they were trying to hit every part of how they all are in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. It was definitely something.
Yeah, and even John has said in interviews like he doesn't know what any of these videos were even meant to be, and he said it was so goofy and
Yeah.
but they were just young in their 20s, and they were just excited to have a record deal and being able to release an album. Excuse me. So yeah, but it's let's get into Slippery now, because Slippery was definitely a different path changer. So obviously 700 was a little more successful than the debut, but it wasn't as successful for the record company to want to keep the band going. So the record company told John, hey, you have one more shot. If this tanks, we're dropping you. So this was essentially a make it or break it album. And they brought in Desmond Child, as we know, who's written many hits. Excuse me, but I'm a little clogged up. I'm getting over a head cold. But they brought in Desmond Child to produce, and it was actually going to be called Wanted Dead or Alive. And there was a few different titles, and we know about the album cover is going to be them
Pink
in
background.
What's that?
The pink border background with the girl.
Well, before that, the Wanted Dead or Alive. So when it was initially concepted as Wanted Dead or Alive, the cover was going to be them like as cowboys and like big beards, and like I don't think they would have been taken seriously. I don't think that album would have been as successful with that kind of cover. And then, like you said, with the busty woman and stuff, I think that would have done well in the 80s, to be honest with you. But John wanted to be taken more serious because a lot of bands back then were just talking about sex and drugs. And obviously John talked a lot. There's a few songs that talk about sex and stuff, but he also wanted to talk about fun party songs and feeling good and stuff like that. So he wanted to be in a different direction than the other bands were. So obviously it became Slippery When Wet, as we know, with the album cover of him writing on a trash bag. But musically, Slippery was, as you and I both, and anybody that pretty much listened to this, Slippery was a huge game changer. They became an opening band to being an afterthought to being booed on stage to the world's biggest band. And it's funny too, because the beginning of the Slippery When Wet album, they were opening up for other bands, and they had a contract to open up for these bands, but they were bigger than the actual headlining bands. Then all of a sudden it was flipped. They were headliners, and they
our 38 Specialist tour pretty much, because they were opening for them. And when that record hit, forget it. It took off to the moon, and it's crazy because you can go songs 1 through 10 and you cannot skip any of them, because you're in heaven, because that album is, thank God it's on this earth, honestly, because I don't know where I would be without it.
It has a good. You mentioned 1 to 10, and it has such a good flow to it, because you put that album in, and one thing I mentioned about Bon Jovi, especially in the 80s, was how each song opened up. 700, you had In and Out of Love, Slippery, Let It Rock, New Jersey, Lay Your Hands on Me, Keep the Faith. I believe I could go on, but it was such a great way to open up Slippery When Wet with the Pink Flamingos, David Bryan playing that, and then just this heavy blown fun rock song. Just about having a good time and rock and rolling and stuff like that. And then, every single song that they released as a single was a major hit. Bad Name, Prayer, Wanted, Never Say Goodbye, Wild in the Streets. Although Never Say Goodbye, Wild in the Streets wasn't as successful.
They were like
came
little
late.
hits.
Yeah. Well, they also came in late too, of the first three.
Mm-hmm.
Because the album's been out for a while now, and so it's kind of like the last two singles for any band for any album. If the album's more than a year old, the singles aren't going to be as successful because people have already heard it. You move
cycle through.
Exactly. But so the
chorus, that like even how impactful Slippery was. Think of like Raise Your Hands was an opener like throughout the whole 2010 decade, the 2000s decade, and I don't think it was technically released as a single off of Slippery, and that song is probably one of out of all their concerts, my favorite when they open it. Whenever I've seen them, they've opened with Raise Your Hands pretty much every time, and it makes you want to speed in your car. That song's insane.
I'm surprised that it didn't become a single. Like, I love Wild in the Streets, and I actually prefer it over Raise Your Hands. But from a success standpoint, I'm surprised they didn't release Raise Your Hands as the single instead of Wild in the Streets.
Yeah, Raise Your Hands commercially, I think, would have been more appealing because it was easier to sing. It was simpler to sing. You understood it a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it had like the little pre-chorus before, obviously, the big chorus. The guitar riff in the beginning has, that you don't need to say anything about that.
Exactly. So let's get into New Jersey. So, with the band's overnight success with Slippery, they were the biggest band in '86 and '87. But after the Slippery tour ended, John wanted to make sure that they weren't known as a one-hit wonder and that they could actually do this again. So if they went in with New Jersey, at the time it was the Sons of Beaches. They're going to call it Sons of Beaches, but it became New Jersey. But they went in there to prove that they weren't just a one-hit wonder, that they could still write hits, they could still sell out arenas and stadiums and stuff. And they worked, I think, like the first batch of songs that John had written for that album, he wasn't confident in any of those songs, and so they scrapped them.
Mm-hmm.
And
some of them are on the deluxe album that came out in 2014, I think. I'm pretty sure.
Well, not those. So a lot of the songs that were in that first, I think we've got like 3 of them, but a lot of those were just tossed. There's a lot, because a lot of those songs that are on the deluxe edition are actually from the second batch of songs. Yeah, but so with New Jersey, they had so much more to prove, and obviously, as we know, they released New Jersey, and it was huge. I mean, Lay Your Hands on Me, Bad Medicine, Born to Be My Baby, Sin, Blood on Blood was released as a video, and then I'll Be There for You.
That's what's crazy. The first 5 songs you just said are the tracking order on the CD. It's Lay Your Hands, Bad Medicine, Born to Be My Baby, Living in Sin and Blood. Like those are your first 5 songs. You're doing something really right. And I'll Be There for You, which I actually think was, I could be wrong, but I think it was more Richie than John. Like I know they both co-wrote it, but I think he had the title originally, and he kind of they both obviously wrote it, but he had more of that was more like of his baby, it felt like.
Yeah, there's a lot of interviews, especially back in the 80s. Richie, even John has said it. Richie was going through a breakup, like in the first, I guess this time you're really leaving. I heard your suitcase say goodbye, blah blah blah. That was Richie that wrote that because he was going through a breakup and he started compiling all these different things. He brought it to John pretty much finished, and John just kind of tweaked this and that, and then it was done. And if they didn't release a song by this point, 1988, where they didn't pour their hearts out, I'll Be There for You was that song.
Yeah.
And I think I'll Be There for You is probably one of the greatest songs that you get as a John and Richie collaboration, especially the way that they sing vocally.
Yeah, because it's almost like Richie's more of a co-lead singer on this song, because the way they harmonized was insane. Because it was almost like, it felt like in a good way, a fight back and forth of who can like one up each other. Because when the bridge comes and everything, I mean, Richie's blues comes out of him, and and it makes your hair stand up on your arms.
Oh, absolutely, man, absolutely. And even when Rich has done it solo, or not, even with the band, when he sings it,
when he sings that song live, that song that he can move the room.
Yeah. So New Jersey proved that they were still one of the greatest rock bands. They were the greatest rock band. There's no argument there. They were. Mm-hmm. And they went on this massive New Jersey tour from '88 to early 1990, and as we know, it dug them out. It tired them down. They were exhausted, and they kind of, as John said, they went on 5 planes in 5 different directions at the end of the tour. And it's funny because the management, they wanted to give them another
70 more.
How many?
70 more shows they wanted them to do.
They would have died.
Yeah, dude. They would have. And also, 99 in the Shade is a gem. That song is so much fun.
Yeah, and you could tell John really has in recent years, we've learned that John has a love for that song.
Yeah.
And I wish he would sing it. I think he said on the Sirius XM thing, New Jersey special a few weeks ago, that he'd love to sing it again, but it's too high for him.
Yeah, those days.
I was like, I don't care about that.
Just get it out there. Just it's not even like, forget about vocally. To hear that drum and guitar intro.
Oh yeah.
Would.
Yeah, especially as an intro to the show, I think it would be great.
Oh, that would be beautiful. That would be. That song's it's a grabber. It grabs you by the throat, and it takes you on a fun, however you want to view it, booze, girls, like that was the fun side where like Social Disease, 99 in a Shade, that was like, it wasn't corny where like you knew what they were talking about. They didn't like, I guess, dumb it down. They made it as dressed up as they could.
Yeah, New Jersey was all about having a good time with 20-year-olds having fun, sex. And then heartbreak and love, and obviously falling in love and also being heartbroken. But let's get into the end of the New Jersey tour. They were exhausted, didn't want to be around each other, and they weren't sure they were ever going to get back together. They just went their separate ways. John went into doing Blaze of Glory, which I guess we'll briefly talk about because I think that's an important part of the evolution of the band. Obviously, Richie did Stranger in This Town. But John was asked to do a movie for Young Guns too. And this was during a time where John was really depressed because of touring and stuff and the huge success that he had. And he went on a motorcycle ride with his friends.
Cross-country thing.
Cross-country. And wrote a lot of these songs. And what I find so great about this album, Blaze of Glory, is that, it was written for Young Guns album, which is about Billy the Kid. He was writing about Billy the Kid, but he was also writing songs about himself and about where he was at that time with the band. Like songs like Never Say Die and
Miracle is lyrically a great song on that album.
Yeah. And I also think that John, obviously the band is, you can't have Bon Jovi without those guys.
Yeah. Okay?
But I think John also needed to prove that he could be successful on his own and show that he had that talent. And obviously Blaze of Glory is a perfect example of that.
When he was able to pull off Blaze of Glory by himself, I mean, that had to be the biggest confidence boost to himself and just in general, because Blaze of Glory is no like little gimmick solo song. That song, everybody knows that song. A lot of people just think it's a Bon Jovi song. It was on, one of those albums back then. But that song, really, I think he was always a man, but he went from like being in his 20s to being like the way he wrote that song, and especially solo. He's the only credential on songwriting on that. I mean, he took the movie script and made it into, a 5-minute and 50-second, number one song where he gets a Golden Globe for it. He flexed his muscles there, and yet stayed humble with it.
Yeah, and it was just this, massive album, and I think it kind of helped keep the Bon Jovi name out there, because from 1990 to mid 1992, you didn't really hear anything about the band, but you also had John Bon Jovi creating this successful soundtrack album with Blaze of Glory. And I think that was great because that kind of kept fans intrigued and connected. Even though they didn't know where the band was going at that time, they knew, okay, well, John's doing this, so this is what's happening, And then, so let's get into Keep the Faith. So obviously, John was, about to be 30 here and decided he wanted to keep the band going. And so I think it was someone in Aerosmith's camp sat with the band in a room.
Luke Cox was his name.
Luke Cox, yep. And they were all sitting in a room, and they kind of just hashed things out. And John kind of is like, this is my direction. This is where I want us to go. And then he fired Doc McGee, who was the manager of the 80's, and said, we're going to manage ourselves. We're going to follow the vision. And you have to remember, 80's hair bands going into the 90's weren't successful because we're getting into the grunge era. We're getting not into the pop. Pop was more mid 90's, which
it was from like 95 on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
When Keep the Faith, but sorry, because he says it like jokingly, but it's true when he says it. When they got rid of Doc McGee, who were going to manage themselves, he always says it. He goes, I may be essentially the quarterback of this team, but don't think I don't need, the line, the running back, so on and so forth. I need you guys more than anything. And took it into his vision and, implemented every, bits and parts of the other four's vision. And Keep the Faith, I mean, I don't another part of his solo writing, like Bed of Roses, I mean, he absolutely killed it. He knows how to songwrite like that, and yet had songs like Keep the Faith, Sleeping I'm Dead to keep, the fans more, engaged with it because they're more anthemy and dancey and they're fun to play live. And
that's what I want to get into, but what I wanted to try to also mention was that going into the, you had still some later bands that were kind of late to the game, like Firehouse and even Poison Poison was around for a while, but other bands like Warrant and stuff, like they were up and coming, but the 80's hair band thing was kind of dying off in the early 90's. And so I think John realized that, hey, I'm going to cut my hair a little bit. We're going to change the direction of sound because Keep the Faith is a lot different than 80's was about having fun, sex, stuff like that. But 90's Bon Jovi was a lot more mature. The new era, new type of sound, sticking to what they were, but also changing the dynamics of what they're writing about. Obviously, the songs like Keep the Faith, I Believe, songs like Dry County were very socially conscious. But then you still got the feel-good tracks like Blame It on the Love, I'll Sleep When I'm Dead. Then you got the great love songs like In These Arms, Bed of Roses, I Want You, stuff like that. So, they stuck to who they were, but they were also becoming more mature.
I think they started to understand that they wanted, they wanted this to be their career. They don't want to die off, kind of like how Poison kind of flopped and Warren kind of flopped. We all know Guns N' Roses, story of the 90's.
Yeah.
And he didn't want that. He wanted to keep going to, prove that not only are we relevant, but we're on the top still.
Exactly. And I don't think they would have been as successful if they were still writing what they were writing in the 90s. I think Keep the Faith was a great first single. And it's funny because John cutting his hair was bigger news.
It was on CNN.
Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me. But, Keep the Faith is such a good album. I always say 90's Bon Jovi was the peak of the band. And we'll get into that with These Days. But 90's was just the best time for the band because they were on point, on their game, at their peak, especially John vocally. In These Arms and Bed of Roses, songs like that really proves how great John was vocally.
Even live, when they did Keep the Faith, the Evening in New York special, when they opened with A Little Help from My Friends by the Beatles.
Yep.
How he belts that especially the end high notes out live is, I mean, he's just there to show you that they're here, they're staying here. And it's weird because some of the other guys like Richie, Tico, Dave, Alec, they all had their long hair still, but they were like, it was classed up and dressed up where, they were, it's almost like they put the business suit on, but they still had the, like the bad boy look that, kept everybody honest about him too.
Yeah. And the photography of Keep the Faith too was, I think, a little aimed toward the grungish look, which, it worked out well. I love the photography for that. And, plus the whole album cover, Keep the Faith, with their hands, because that symbolized what, like we kind of said a little bit ago, new direction of the band, new era, new vision, and just all 5 band members saying, we're in this together as a band, and then go.
Let's get rolling.
So let's get into, so the first this is the album that started it all for you with your dad, Crossroad. Obviously, it was just a compilation, and it actually started out as the band wanted to, because they're famous for the Unplugged series back in '88, when John and Richie did Wanted and Prayer, but they wanted to do it with Runaway, and it didn't work out, and so they actually decided to redo Prayer, and they put it on the Crossroad album. And then we got Always and Someday I'll Be Saturday Night, which Someday I'll Be Saturday Night was actually supposed to be on These Days album.
Yeah.
And got put on Crossroad. But Always is the band's biggest #1 single.
And that says so much because it's essentially on technically their first greatest hits compilation. It's on their first, the title of the album, Crossroad, where it just kind of, the way I view it is, they're, crossing roads, obviously, going into more mature sound, but, they're still staying true to their roots. And Always, I mean, this goes back to just, they know how to open a song with Tico's drum fill in the beginning, and then Dave's piano, and the way Richie's guitar solo is. It's not so much more like late 80s loud, but it's obviously still great, but it's like bluesed up. It's more soulful. And the song Always was actually, it was supposed to be in a movie, I think, called
Romeo's Bleeding.
Romeo's Bleeding, and it was going to be a soundtrack, and some executive or whoever, asked for a song, and the movie didn't make it, and John was like, and the guy said to John, he's like, that song's going to be a smash. He's like, you think? And they put it on Crossroad and forget. I actually like the live version of that song so much better.
So that's actually an iconic story. So it's actually flipped. So John wrote Always for Romeo's Bleeding.
Yeah.
And then he watched the demo of the movie, the rough cut, and didn't like the movie at all. And he pulled the song out and didn't think it was worth much. And so he put it on a shelf somewhere. And it was actually the producer, I'm drawing a blank right now, who was helping to produce Crossroads, and this is going to be a smash hit. And John said, no, it's not.
Yeah.
And I think John said there was something there for it, though. But I think what is on the 2004 box, that was actually the version that was supposed to go on the movie. So obviously it was definitely a lot different than what went on Crossroad. But obviously then it went on Crossroad. Thankfully, it was the band. John has never been known to be successful with picking out the right songs. Prayer as an example, But so that's so you had the story. It was just flipped. I think it was just such an important story to mention. So
it needs to be, and even just that song live is the outro with the guitar.
Man,
does usually the pre-chorus and the bridge. It's not, it's good without Richie, but when Richie, was there at the peak and the late 90s, 2000s, man, that was magic.
Yeah. Wembley, 95, the most amazing performance. If I had to pick the most incredible performance by the band, if I could go back in time to see any performance, Wembley 95 of Always. Man, the way that Richie just pours his heart out, that outro, the band is just on point with it all, Like, they don't miss a single note. They're in it. It's just, man, I love it. It's absolutely phenomenal. And, And it's funny too because a lot of people think "Always" as a love song, like "Oh, I love you, baby, always," and but it's not. As you know, it's about a stalker who's obsessed with some woman, and
Yeah.
and the video portrays
Watch
some.
the music video.
Yeah,
I don't really think they have that like I love you kind of love song. There was always a little bit of pain in them. He
yeah,
obviously they had songs where they emphasize like Story of Love is a newer song, and
mhm,
that's I think more about his family and stuff. But
yeah,
man, made he was very realistic with his early ballads. I'll be there for you, Better Roses Always, because he wanted, especially he was talking to his audience, which was then, between late teens to, whatever his age was at the moments where he was like, yeah, no, it sucks to get your heart ripped out. And,
hmm
this is exactly how you're probably feeling.
exactly. And it was a fun the photography for that era too. They did a lot of the photo shoot at Roadside Diner, which I visited about 10 years ago, and it was kind of cool to see. His little rink-a-dink diner and stuff, and I don't know. So I love the style. Like even if you look at like this poster here,
Yep.
The band looks so cool,
Mm-hmm.
and actually kind of brings me to my next point. So this was actually Alec's departure here.
Yep.
So this photo here, Alec is actually in that photo too, but this poster was sold on These Days tour, and they cut Alec out of it. But so I think we had to mention, the original bassist Alec John Such. What's the best way to phrase this? Left the band. Obviously,
And
there
left
was
the
that.
business.
Yeah, Alec was spilling the beat. And it's no secret that Alec actually didn't play a lot on the albums.
Yeah, from what I understand, especially after the slippery New Jersey era, after the 80's era, he wasn't on much of Keep the Faith, and obviously he wasn't on any of Saturday Night and Always.
Yeah. Well, from what I've learned, he wasn't on a lot of the '80s stuff either. He did a few tracks here and there, or he would write, or somebody else would write his stuff, and he'd either record or somebody else would record it. He just got the credit, but he was essentially the playing basses live, and that's it for a lot of bands. But yeah, so Alec left the band, and obviously Hugh kind of, John had always kind of said, we're never going to replace.
It was unofficially or unofficial member.
And we're never going to replace any of the band members, the original band members. We'll fast forward to 2016. Okay, but that's so. These Days came out, and These Days I'd probably put it as my fifth or sixth favorite album, but you cannot deny that it is probably the greatest Bon Jovi album that they have ever done. We talk about the 90's was their peak. These Days was the peak of that peak. And it was, it's funny because a lot of the critics and even fans will say this is such a dark album, but John will say it was the happiest time of his life at the time, and it was optimistic. And so I think you, as a fan, you really have to get into that album because it's one of those Misery Loves Company albums, but you also, let's find the light at the end of the tunnel together.
Yeah.
We're in this together. Let's get through it. Then you find that light. That's where the optimism, I think, comes in. Songs like "Lie to Me" is a perfect example of that.
It was a very mature album. It was very maturely written, and he still had the same, philosophy where like, "Hey, God's the first track." That's a hell of a way to open an album, and then having songs like obviously "This Ain't a Love Song," "These Days," "Something for the Pain," "My Guitar Lies Bleeding in My Arms." That album, it's probably my third favorite album. That album can hang with any of them. I enjoy that album. I never skip a song on that album. That album really, it just showed that they were comfortable in their own skin doing what they were doing. They weren't trying to recreate what they did on their first four albums. They were evolving with their times, and they were that's probably one of their most successful tours as well, the These Days tour.
Exactly, yeah. And it's such a shame because These Days wasn't successful in the 90's or in the US here.
Overseas it was.
Overseas it was huge. But here people are expecting just another fun rock. But like you said, it was the most mature album that they ever have done. And sadly, I mean, there's such good gems on there, that really, Heartbreaking Eve is my absolute favorite one on that album. And I love how I always think it's like an Always sequel that didn't live up to par.
I can see
to
where
Always
he's going with that.
Yeah, it pretty much has a lot of the same chords and instrumentation, just a little different. But these days is obviously it's a huge Die Hard fan favorite.
Mm-hmm.
You ask a lot of diehards, and they'll say these days. Even the photography was phenomenal, with the band. And in '96 they released a special edition of These Days in Europe because of how successful it was.
Yeah, these days overseas was massive. I mean, those 3 Wembley shows in '95, I think, just shows you how massive it was. Having the crowd singing "This Ain't a Love Song" back to them. That's probably, in the U.S., that ballad I don't think is talked about or appreciated as much because it just wasn't as commercially successful here.
Yeah.
But man, this Ain't a Love Song. I think it was 2013 on the What About Now tour. They were in Italy, and he was bantering back and forth with the crowd of what to do the encore with. And when he said "This Ain't a Love Song," that crowd roared for he was doing who's louder, and it was "This Ain't a Love Song," and I forgot what the other song was, and they all.
Which show are you talking about? You cut out.
In Milan, in Italy, in 2013.
Okay.
When he said he was bantering between which songs to, close the show out with, and he said, I think it was "I'll Be There for You" or "These Days," and he was letting them scream to make the decision, and "This Ain't a Love Song" won, and he blew it away.
Wow. And it's great to see that those songs still live up. And it's a shame because here in the States, it's very rare that he'll play those songs. But overseas, he'll play "This Ain't a Love Song." And These Days, even "Diamond Ring," "Something for the Pain" has kind of gotten some airplay here and there. "Hey God" as well.
Hey God more than them, I think. I know they would do "Diamond Ring" or "Something to Believe in," something for the Pain on the Circle tour acoustically. When they would go out into the Circle, and even with "This Ain't a Love Song," that's a staple overseas. I'm pretty sure he closed the 2011 tour in Portugal with "This Ain't a Love Song." That song stands up.
Yeah, something else that's noteworthy too about These Days tour is 2 things: the way that he would end the show with These Days with the throwing the mic stand and get on his knees and finishing that song and then walking off. And then also Yokohama, 1996, with "Something to Believe in." Man, what a phenomenal performance of that. And there's also other good performance of that song too. But Yokohama, man, blows me away. Wembley performances. But let's get into 1997. So obviously, the band took not a break, but just obviously the band has said in interviews, hey, we're not broken up. We're just kind of, because this is mid 1996 when they finished the These Days tour. Mm-hmm. And John was starting to get into acting, Moonlight Valentino, Little City, Leading Man, stuff like that. Bunch of movies, so he was kind of focused on that. And then he also released a solo album, Destination Anywhere. Richie released Undiscovered Soul. David Bryan released On a Full Moon. But I want to talk about John's solo album here, Destination Anywhere, because I think that's one of his most honest and open and vulnerable albums that he has ever written.
Yeah, it was definitely the way, again, how they didn't split. It was just, they all, I think, just had a clearer vision for themselves at the moment compared to when New Jersey ended and the debacle it was because of the record people wanted, 70, 80 more shows. And they just basically took a step back. We're not going anywhere. We're not broken up. We're all doing our own things at the moment. And John, he had a fun little tour, I think, with Destination Anywhere that had Everett Bradley on it too, as a percussionist.
And then Bobby Bandiera.
Yep. And Richie did Undiscovered Soul. And it's so unique to hear Richie with Bon Jovi and Richie solo. Because it's too different. Because he's even said that when him and John would write, all the records, it was like a healthy debate when they would collaborate and write about whatever topic they were talking about. And on his solo records, he would be as bluesy as you could be, and you would think there's no way this guy was in a hard rock band or any of that kind of stuff. And it just shows how musically, how great they could stretch, they could play all fields essentially.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, because they really, I think, as John has said in later years, it's good for the bands to go out and venture and do other things. And then they come back and they have something fresh to bring into. Mm-hmm. But John and Richie, even David's solo albums, all three of them, you get a taste of their talents individually. Like Richie, you can tell how bluesy he is and how soulful his voice is. John, you get a better sense of his songwriting. And I want to talk about Destination Anywhere because it coincided. As I said, he was in a bunch of different movies. He also produced Destination Anywhere, the film, which was kind of centered off of his manager at the time, Paul Korzelius, who's been with the band for many years. But his, the story is, which August 7th comes from. She was basically, it's an unsolved mystery still, but she was basically kidnapped and murdered, and that kind of made John write an album about some of that, and then the movie was obviously centered off of that. But in the album itself, you could tell that it's one of the most open and most vulnerable, honest albums that he has ever written. And he has such good songs in it. Like Every Word Was a Piece of My Heart, It's Just Me, Staring at Your Suitcase, Midnight Jealousy is fun, And but 90s was such a good era for the band, or for John at the end of the 90s, because they had 97, 98. Basically, the band was back together at the end of 98 because they started to write songs for Crush, which was supposed to be called Sex Sells in 99, but then it got moved to 2000, which we are actually going to end this recording, and we're going to do a part 2 here, just to start off with Crush. But to kind of conclude this episode, they really didn't get much time away from each other because they essentially regrouped at the end of 98 and to start writing for what we know as Crush. But it was still cool to see John in the acting. I mean, there was a movie left and right with him. We had
he was
and
he was like you said. I didn't hear you cut out. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Like he says all the time, like about It's My Life, that with Frank Sinatra, like, he was doing it his way. He was doing movies when he wanted to. He was evolving. He was seeing if he liked this, if he didn't like this, and that was the best part of it. That they all had the understanding to do those things.
Yeah.
Without it being an article that John's going solo or Richie's going solo. It wasn't that, because it was all collaborative. They all agreed to this amongst each other, that we're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing that. See you in a year and a half, and we're gonna see where we all are from there. We'll move forward from there.
Exactly. So let's end this episode with finishing up with the 90s. I'm gonna end the recording, and then we'll start on part 2.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
No problem.